The stars were silent that night, or so it seemed to the lone figure standing on the barren surface of the alien planet. Dark, jagged mountains loomed in the distance, their sharp peaks cutting into the dim light of a distant sun. The wind howled through the rocky valleys, carrying with it the scent of strange minerals and a faint metallic tang that made the human soldier flinch. Yet he did not falter. Across from him, standing tall and regal, was a being unlike any he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly, shifting colors like liquid metal under the pale light. Eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied him with an intensity that could have pierced steel. She was the commander of a fearsome alien fleet, a warrior of a species that had conquered dozens of star systems. Entire worlds trembled at her name, and yet here she was, standing before one human soldier, scrutinizing him as though he were a puzzle she could not solve. "You are far from your home, human," she said, her voice echoing across the barren plain. It was calm, but every syllable carried power. "And yet, you do not look afraid. Why?" The human straightened his back, keeping his gaze steady, though his heart had begun to pound in his chest. "Because fear doesn't help," he said simply. "It never has. It only makes you weaker. I can be afraid, but I can still act. That is what matters." Her lips curved slightly, more in curiosity than amusement. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Most would scream, plead, beg. Some would try to attack. But this human, he simply stood calm, almost serene. "You do not understand," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Fear is survival. It keeps your instincts sharp. It keeps you alive. You are on a world where I could destroy you in an instant, yet you stand there without trembling." "I understand perfectly," he replied. "I know what I am facing, and I also know that fear will not save me. Only what I do will." Her eyes narrowed. It was not disrespect she felt, it was intrigue. She had seen thousands of species bow, scream, or submit, and none had answered her in this way. Humans were a primitive species, fragile, soft, yet there was something in this one that made her pause. "Then tell me," she said, stepping closer, her boots leaving deep impressions in the alien soil. "What makes you different from all the others I have conquered? Why aren't you afraid?" The human took a deep breath, the air sharp in his lungs. "Because I have learned that fear is a tool, not a master. I feel it, I know it, but I do not let it control me. I do what must be done." She tilted her head, her long hair, if it could be called that, floating slightly in the wind. There was silence between them, broken only by the hiss of the alien winds and the distant rumble of shifting rocks. Finally, she spoke, softer this time. "You have courage, but courage alone does not keep you alive." "I know," he said. "It's not just courage, it's responsibility. I fight because there are people I need to protect, because there are others who cannot fight for themselves. That is stronger than fear, stronger than any weapon." For a moment, the alien commander said nothing. Her species had conquered countless planets, crushed civilizations, and bent entire armies to their will. She had never met a being who spoke with such conviction in the face of certain danger. She had never met a being who made her question her own power. "You speak as if life has meaning beyond survival," she said finally, her voice low. "As if there is more than dominance, more than victory. You are strange, human." "I am human," he said simply. "And yes, we are strange. We live, we fight, we lose, we win. But we always try to do what is right, even when it is hard. That is what makes us strong." Her eyes softened just slightly as she studied him. She could see it now, the spark that had made him stand there, alone on this alien world, unshaken by her presence. That spark was not recklessness. It was not arrogance. It was something far more dangerous, unshakable resolve. "You speak well," she said, "but words mean nothing in battle. Can your resolve survive the reality of death?" "I've seen death," he replied. "I've faced it many times. And I've learned that fearing it does not change the outcome. Acting in spite of it, protecting others despite it, that is what matters." She studied him for what felt like hours, the wind whipping around them, the jagged rocks casting long shadows. The stars above seemed indifferent to their confrontation, yet beneath their cold light a connection was forming, one neither had expected. Finally, she spoke again, softer now, almost whispering. "You are unusual, perhaps dangerous in ways I do not yet understand." The human shrugged, though he knew she could see it as a challenge. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just human. That alone is enough to surprise you." The alien commander looked at him, her mind racing. She had conquered worlds, defeated armies, and bent countless species to her will. And yet this one human soldier, small, fragile, unarmed beyond his wits, had done something no one else could. He had faced her without fear, without submission, without begging. "You will either die here," she said finally, stepping back, "or you will teach me something I have never known. That is a dangerous combination." He nodded, understanding the truth in her words. Danger was everywhere in the galaxy, and yet humans had survived, thrived, and even fought back against impossible odds. Fear was never the enemy, inaction was, and he had never known a life where he could do nothing. She studied him for a moment longer, then turned her gaze toward the horizon. Something in her shifted. She had expected him to tremble, to beg, to falter. Instead, he had stood with calm conviction, challenging not just her, but everything her species believed about strength and fear. "You humans," she murmured, almost to herself. "You are extraordinary." He simply nodded, keeping his eyes on her. "We can be," he said. "But it depends on the choice we make every moment. Fear is there, but we do not let it rule us." The alien commander felt a stir of emotion she could not name. It was not respect, not admiration, not anger. It was something more complex, more dangerous. Perhaps it was the first time she had encountered a species that could not be fully understood, fully controlled, and that frightened her more than any weapon could. "You will not die easily, human," she said finally, her voice firm but quiet. "And I do not know if I should be pleased or wary of that." "I will survive," he said simply, "not because I am fearless, but because I choose to act, because I have something worth protecting. That is all any of us can do." The wind continued to howl across the jagged rocks, the stars burning cold and distant above them. Yet in the silence between their words, a fragile understanding began to form, one that neither of them could ignore. And for the first time in her long life, the alien commander felt uncertain. She had faced countless enemies, ruled countless worlds, and yet this one human soldier, so small, so seemingly fragile, had managed to unsettle her completely. Not with power, not with weapons, but with courage, with choice. "You are strange," she said again, softer this time. "Perhaps you are exactly what the galaxy needs, or perhaps you are the beginning of something I cannot yet comprehend." He did not answer. He simply stood steady, breathing in the cold air, letting her words settle. Fear was still there, he would not deny it, but it did not rule him. It never had. And as the alien commander watched him, her mind racing with possibilities she had never imagined, she realized something startling. This human was more than a soldier. He was a symbol of something her galaxy had long forgotten: courage, hope, choice. And in that moment, she knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The alien commander did not know how long she had watched the human soldier that day. The barren plains had turned cold under the twin moons, and the wind carried whispers of distant storms. Yet the human remained calm, steady, as if the world itself had no power over him. She had expected fear, trembling, or even defiance. But what she had seen instead unsettled her more than any weapon ever could: composure, courage, and a strange, quiet authority. She decided to observe him, not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, but as a being that might teach her something she could not yet understand. In the days that followed, she sent him to tasks that would break most of her captives: climbing jagged cliffs to repair ancient alien machinery, navigating deadly storms in the valleys below, and enduring hours of exposure to the harsh alien winds. Yet every time he returned unbroken. His face was smeared with dirt, his uniform torn, and his hands bruised, but his spirit remained untouched. "Do you tire?" she asked one evening, standing across from him as the suns dipped below the mountains. He shook his head. "I am human. We are meant to endure. Not all of us succeed, but we try, and trying, that is more important than comfort." She stared at him, realizing she had expected him to beg for rest, to collapse, to complain. Humans were fragile. They were soft. And yet this one defied every expectation. "Your species, you are strange," she murmured. "You risk life after life, yet you do not seek glory. You do not ask for reward. Why?" He wiped sweat from his brow and shrugged. "We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. We protect. That is what matters. Not glory, not recognition, just doing what must be done." The alien commander found herself reconsidering her own beliefs. In her culture, survival meant dominance, and dominance meant control. Fear was a tool to maintain order. Strength was measured by how many you could command or crush. And yet, watching this human, she realized that perhaps she had been measuring the wrong things. Courage, choice, and loyalty, these were forms of strength she had never fully understood. A week later, a larger threat arrived. Ships from a neighboring warlike species appeared in orbit, their weapons primed to devastate the planet. The alien commander's fleet was outnumbered, and her warriors were weary from months of battle. Panic rippled through her ranks. She expected the human to cower, to hesitate, or at least to plead for safety. Instead, he stood calmly at the command center, studying the holographic projections of enemy ships. "We can't defeat them head-on," he said, "but we can protect the civilians and slow their advance. Focus on what must be done. Fear will not help us." Her eyes widened. He was devising a plan, not with weapons she understood, not with tactics or species valued, but with logic, determination, and a deep understanding of human ingenuity. You lead," she asked, almost in disbelief. "I am not a commander," he admitted, "but I know what must be done, and if I can do it, others can follow." The commander watched as he moved among her soldiers, speaking with calm authority, showing them how to use their strengths, protect the weak, and prepare for what seemed like certain defeat. They listened. They obeyed. They believed. And slowly, the tide of panic began to shift. She realized then that humans had a power beyond mere survival. They inspired. They gave hope. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human soldier's calm courage spread through her ranks like fire. Fear had no hold over them because they did not act under its command. They acted in spite of it. The battle began at dawn. Alien ships rained down destruction across the plains, but the human had positioned defenders in clever formations, using terrain to their advantage. Explosions rocked the ground, fires spread across the plains, and yet the human moved among the chaos, guiding, encouraging, and protecting. The commander could not take her eyes off him. She had faced countless warriors in her life, but none had moved through danger with such steady resolve. None had risked their life for others so willingly. And as she watched him save lives she had long considered unworthy, she began to feel something she had never felt before: admiration. Hours into the battle, the human and the commander found themselves on a ridge overlooking the battlefield. She had thought she would see fear in his eyes at any moment, but all she saw was focus, determination, and an unwavering commitment to life. "You are remarkable," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "I have faced death 1,000 times, and yet I have never seen anyone move through it with such grace." He turned to her, his face smudged with soot and sweat. "Grace isn't the right word. Survival isn't about skill or luck. It's about choice. We choose to act. We choose to protect. Fear is always there, but we do not let it rule us." She considered his words, her mind racing. Her species had valued fear as a tool and strength as dominance. And yet here was a being who could face death, fight impossible odds and protect others, not because of power, but because of will. It unsettled her more than any weapon could. As the enemy began to retreat, beaten by clever tactics and unexpected human courage, she finally understood something crucial. Humans were not strong because they were fearless. They were strong because they refused to let fear control them. And in that refusal, they could achieve the impossible. After the battle, she walked among the wounded, seeing the human help those who had fallen. He lifted them, encouraged them, and inspired them to rise again. Every movement, every word, spoke of a species that valued life over victory, courage over dominance, and hope over despair. She found herself following him silently as he moved through the chaos. For the first time, she wondered what it would mean to serve someone like this, to fight beside someone who understood that true strength was measured not by power, but by action in the face of fear. That night, as the moons rose and the fires of battle still smoldered across the plains, she approached him. "Tell me," she said quietly, "how do you face death without fear?" He looked at her, tired but steady. "I feel fear," he admitted, "but I do not let it control me. I act for those who cannot act for themselves. I fight because it is right, not because I am not afraid. Fear is always there, but courage is a choice." She stared at him, breathless. Not from fear, not from battle, but from something deeper, something she could not name. She had expected a simple answer. She had expected arrogance or recklessness. Instead, she found wisdom, humility, and an unwavering moral clarity that shook her to her core. You are unlike any being I have ever known," she whispered. "And I do not know how to measure you. How do I even compare my strength to yours?" He smiled faintly. "Strength is not a competition. It is not about who rules, who conquers, or who survives. It is about what you choose to do when you have the chance to make a difference. That is the measure of strength." For the first time in her long life, the alien commander felt unsure of herself. She had faced countless threats, commanded armies, and bent entire worlds to her will. And yet, one human soldier, small, fragile, seemingly insignificant, had shown her a truth her species had long ignored. Fear did not define strength. Choice did. Courage did. Loyalty did. The stars burned cold and distant above them, indifferent to the lives below. Yet in that moment, beneath the twin moons and the smoldering fires of battle, the commander felt something stir within her. Respect, wonder, and something dangerously close to admiration. She realized then that this human was not merely a soldier. He was a symbol of something her galaxy had forgotten. A spark of hope. A reminder that life, courage, and choice were more powerful than fear, domination, or brute strength. And as she watched him move among the wounded, helping, guiding, and inspiring, she understood something she had never considered. Humans were dangerous not because they were fearless, but because they refused to let fear rule them. The thought left her breathless. The galaxy had never seen a force like humanity before. Word of the human soldier's courage spread faster than any weapon could fire, and even alien species long convinced of their superiority began to whisper about the human's unbreakable spirit. And yet the threat remained. A massive fleet from a warlike species, larger and stronger than any had faced before, approached Earth with intent to annihilate. The stakes were higher than ever, and the alien commander who had once captured the human now found herself fighting alongside him, unsure whether she should trust him or fear him. The human surveyed the fleet from the command bridge of the joint alien-human station. His eyes, steady and calm, moved over the projections of enemy vessels. Around him, alien commanders shouted orders, their panic barely contained. Entire civilizations had been reduced to rubble by this fleet. Their reputation was terrifying, yet the human stood unshaken. "We can't fight them head-on," he said, his voice low but firm. "We can't match their firepower, but we can protect our people, defend the planets that cannot defend themselves, and hit them where they are weakest. Every action counts. Fear will not help us." The alien commander standing beside him felt a chill run through her. He had a plan, a strategy she could not fully understand, but one that relied not on overwhelming strength, but on cunning, timing, and trust in others. She had fought wars where victory was measured by destruction. Here, the human measured victory by survival and the protection of the helpless. It was a new kind of warfare, one she could not ignore. "You truly believe humans can survive this?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the station. He turned to her, calm, resolute. "We will survive, not because we are fearless, but because we do not let fear rule our actions. Courage is a choice. And when we fight for something worth protecting, we become stronger than anyone expects." The commander found herself nodding, unable to refute the truth in his words. She had been raised to fear nothing, to dominate everything. And yet she was learning that courage, human courage, was something far more powerful than fearlessness. The first wave of the enemy fleet struck. Explosions shook the planets below, and debris littered the orbital space. Alien and human ships launched counterattacks, but the fleet was vast, relentless, and seemingly unstoppable. Panic surged among the younger human pilots, but the soldier moved among them, guiding, encouraging, and calming. "Focus on what you can do," he said. "Do not let fear control your hands. Act and you will survive." The commander watched in awe. Entire fleets had crumbled under this kind of pressure before, but humans, this human, were not just surviving. They were adapting, improvising, and turning the enemy's strength against them. They were fearless not because they lacked fear, but because they refused to let it stop them. Hours passed, and the battle raged. Planetary defenses held longer than anyone expected. Civilians were evacuated, and the human soldier led strikes against the enemy fleet's weak points. Every move he made inspired others to act, creating a chain of courage that spread through the galaxy's defenders. The alien commander found herself following his lead, instinctively trusting his judgment despite knowing she could crush the humans if she wished. But she didn't wish to. She had learned something new. Humans were not simply prey, not simply a weak species. They were protectors, fighters, and teachers of a strength she had never known. As the enemy fleet began to falter under the humans' ingenuity and courage, the commander stood beside the soldier on a forward observation deck. The battle continued below, but a shift had occurred. Fear no longer ruled. Unity, loyalty, and courage now drove the defenders. "You humans," she said quietly, almost in awe, "you are more dangerous than any weapon I have ever known." He smiled faintly, his eyes never leaving the battlefield. "Dangerous is not the word. We survive, yes. We fight, yes. But it is not for ourselves. It is for those who cannot fight, for those who need protection. That is what makes us human." She looked at him, breathless, realizing she had never considered this. Entire civilizations had fallen because fear controlled them. Entire fleets had been destroyed because pride and arrogance ruled. And yet these humans, so small, so fragile by her standards, were turning the galaxy upside down, not through brute force but through courage, choice, and loyalty. The battle reached its climax when the enemy flagship approached Earth's orbit, threatening to destroy the planet. Human and alien pilots launched a coordinated strike under the soldier's guidance. Explosions lit the void, ships maneuvered with precision, and finally, with the soldier leading the charge, the flagship was disabled. The enemy retreated in disarray, leaving the galaxy stunned at the humans' unexpected victory. The commander walked among the survivors afterward, seeing the devastation and the resilience alike. She watched humans helping aliens, aliens helping humans, and the soldier moving tirelessly among them, ensuring every life was accounted for. Fear had been everywhere, but it had not won. Courage had, choice had, humanity had. She approached him at last, her step slow, almost hesitant. "Tell me," she said, her voice softer than it had ever been, "how do you face this, knowing the enemy is stronger, faster, and more deadly?" He turned to her, eyes steady. I feel fear, he admitted, every time. But I do not let it control me. I act for others. I protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is stronger than fear. That is what makes life worth living. For a long moment she could not speak. Her species had conquered with fear and dominance for centuries, believing it was the ultimate measure of strength. And yet here she was, standing beside a human soldier who had survived battles that would have broken any other being, who had inspired courage in allies and respect in enemies, and who had done it all not because he was fearless, but because he chose courage over submission. You are extraordinary," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "And I do not know what to make of it," he smiled faintly. "It's not extraordinary, it's simple. We act even when afraid. We protect even when it costs us. That is all anyone can do." She studied him, realizing she had underestimated humans for far too long. They were not the fragile species she had dismissed. They were not weak, easily dominated, or expendable. They were unpredictable, resourceful, and courageous in ways her galaxy had never seen. And in that unpredictability lay their greatest power. Days later, as the smoke cleared and the survivors began to rebuild, the commander found herself walking beside the human soldier. She had once thought she could measure strength by power and fear by dominance. Now she understood that humans had taught her a new measure: courage, choice, and loyalty. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" she asked quietly, echoing the question she had first posed weeks ago. He looked at her, tired but resolute. "I am afraid," he said honestly. "Every day in every battle, but I do not let it stop me. Courage is a choice. I fight not because I am fearless, but because what I protect is worth more than my fear." She felt breathless, not from danger but from understanding. For the first time, she realized that fear had never truly defined humans. Their courage did. Their willingness to act, to protect, to sacrifice for others. That was the power her galaxy had overlooked. And in that moment, standing on a planet that had once seemed doomed, she understood why. Humans were dangerous not because they lacked fear, but because they refused to be ruled by it. They were protectors, teachers, and warriors in a way that no one had ever imagined. And that made them unstoppable. The commander took a deep breath and nodded. "Perhaps the galaxy has underestimated you for far too long," he smiled faintly. "Perhaps," he said, "but it's never too late to learn." As the twin moons rose over the horizon, casting a soft light on the scars of battle, she realized something profound. Humanity had changed the galaxy, not with firepower, not with domination, but with courage, choice, and the simple refusal to let fear control them. And she would never forget it. The human soldier, small and unassuming, had proven that even the most fragile species could inspire greatness, protect the innocent, and reshape the course of history. And the galaxy would never be the same again.